Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945, stands as one of the most influential works of political philosophy in the 20th century, a passionate and reasoned defense of liberal democracy written amidst the turmoil of World War II. Confronting the intellectual roots of totalitarian ideologies, Popper traces how certain revered philosophical traditions, particularly those of Plato, Hegel, and Marx, have unwittingly contributed to the rise of authoritarianism. Against these currents, he presents a compelling vision of the open society, a social order built upon critical reasoning, individual liberty, and democratic accountability. This vision is offered not merely as an abstract ideal but as an antidote to the dangers of dogmatism, conformity, and ideological absolutism that characterized the fascist and communist regimes of his time. Philosophical foundations, Enlightenment, liberalism, and rationalism. At the heart of Popper's argument lies a set of philosophical commitments deeply rooted in Enlightenment thought. He draws upon the Enlightenment's trust in reason, its skepticism of dogma, and its belief in the capacity of individuals to think and act autonomously. From classical liberalism, Popper inherits a firm belief in the sanctity of individual liberty, the value of limited government, and the necessity of protecting pluralism. Influences from Locke, Mill, and Tocqueville are evident throughout his work, particularly in his conviction that free discourse and institutional checks are indispensable to any just society. Just as important is Popper's methodological commitment to critical rationalism, a theory of knowledge grounded in the scientific principle of conjecture and refutation. He rejects certainty and absolutism in favor of tentative hypotheses, continuous criticism, and empirical testing. In applying this epistemological model to politics, Popper charts a path for societies to reform themselves incrementally, learning from failures and avoiding the utopian temptation of grand ideological schemes. His work is also animated by a visceral response to the catastrophes of his time, Nazism and Stalinism, movements that he views as logical extensions of dangerous philosophical doctrines masked as scientific truths. The Open Society, and its adversary, the Closed Society. Popper distinguishes sharply between two types of social organization, the Open Society and the Closed Society. A closed society is tribal, hierarchical, and static, organized around rigid traditions and unquestioned authority. In such societies, dissent is not merely discouraged but actively suppressed, and the collective will overshadows the rights of the individual. Totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia serve as historical exemplars of this model, where conformity is enforced and the state becomes an all-consuming moral authority. By contrast, the open society is dynamic, democratic, and pluralistic. It is characterized by its capacity for self-correction, its commitment to reasoned debate, and its institutional openness to dissent and reform. Popper eloquently states, "The open society is characterized by a willingness to allow change and to question authority, whereas the closed society seeks to maintain its traditions and suppress dissent." This distinction is not merely academic, it offers a practical framework for evaluating political systems and defending democratic institutions against the ever-present threats of authoritarianism. The fallacy of historicism, a critique of deterministic thinking. Central to Popper's critique is his rejection of historicism, the belief that history unfolds according to immutable laws or predetermined trajectories. He argues that this belief, while alluring in its promise of predictability, is both unscientific and politically dangerous. Historicism underpins many totalitarian ideologies by justifying repression in the name of an inevitable future. Popper targets Marxist historicism in particular, exposing how Marx's theory of historical materialism lends itself to authoritarian interpretations. The belief in historical destiny is sheer superstition, he writes, and like all forms of determinism, it leads to complacency or fanaticism. By debunking historicism, Popper empowers individuals and societies to resist fatalism. Rather than resigning themselves to the arc of history, citizens of an open society must take active responsibility for shaping their political and moral futures, through deliberation and reform. Philosophical targets: Plato, Hegel, and Marx. Popper's intellectual project takes a confrontational turn as he critiques three major philosophers, Plato, Hegel, and Marx, each of whom, in his view, laid ideological groundwork for modern authoritarianism. Plato is portrayed as the originator of a deeply anti-democratic vision. In The Republic, Popper sees not an ideal of justice, but a blueprint for a rigid caste system ruled by so-called philosopher kings. Plato's political philosophy, he writes, is fundamentally anti-democratic, seeking to replace the open society with a caste system ruled by an elite. In suppressing individual liberty for the sake of communal order, Plato elevates stability over freedom, a tendency Popper sees echoed in later totalitarian ideologies. Turning to Hegel, Popper accuses him of obscurantism and state worship. Hegel's notion of history as the unfolding of absolute spirit, culminating in the Prussian state, exemplifies what Popper views as the deification of government. Hegel's deification of the state paves the way for totalitarian ideologies, he contends, seeing in Hegel a precursor to the nationalist doctrines that plagued Europe. Finally, Popper offers a nuanced but firm critique of Marx. He acknowledges Marx's insights into capitalist exploitation but rejects Marxism as a form of historicism that too easily morphs into dogma. Marxism transforms a valid critique of society into a pseudo-scientific prophecy, Popper writes, which, when implemented, results in tyranny. The Soviet Union's claims to historical inevitability, he argues, exemplify the dangers of Marxist determinism when applied to governance. The pragmatic alternative: piecemeal social engineering. As a constructive alternative to revolutionary upheaval and utopian theorizing, Popper proposes piecemeal social engineering. Rather than seeking to build a perfect society, we should strive to alleviate specific injustices through gradual, evidence-based reform. Instead of trying to construct a perfect society, he writes, we should aim to minimize avoidable suffering through gradual improvements. This model, inspired by the scientific method, emphasizes trial and error, transparency, and institutional accountability. Examples include democratic welfare reforms, anti-discrimination laws, and environmental regulation, policies that address systemic problems without dismantling the frameworks of liberal democracy. For Popper, this is the only responsible way to pursue justice in a complex, pluralistic society. Critical rationalism, and the paradox of tolerance. Popper's theory of knowledge, critical rationalism, extends to his political philosophy. He insists that ideas must be open to criticism, and that progress depends on the constant interplay of competing perspectives. Yet this openness has limits. In one of his most famous formulations, Popper introduces the paradox of tolerance: unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. To defend a tolerant society, we must be intolerant of intolerance. In practical terms, this means that liberal democracies must actively resist ideologies that seek to undermine democratic freedoms, from hate speech that incites violence to movements that reject the legitimacy of pluralism itself. Tolerance, for Popper, is not passive acquiescence but a vigilant and principled defense of openness. Contemporary relevance and real-world implications. Popper's insights remain profoundly relevant today. His conceptual tools help us evaluate democratic institutions under strain, from populist movements to authoritarian backsliding. His critique of historicism encourages citizens to reject fatalistic narratives and embrace agency. His model of piecemeal reform offers a pragmatic path forward in addressing inequality, climate change, and global injustice, without falling into the trap of utopian extremism. Moreover, his paradox of tolerance has become a cornerstone of debates on free speech, particularly in confronting the resurgence of hate groups, extremist ideologies, and misinformation in digital spaces. Critiques and intellectual responses. Despite its enduring influence, The Open Society and Its Enemies has drawn significant criticism from across the philosophical spectrum. Marxist thinkers, such as Jürgen Habermas, argue that Popper misrepresents the dialectical complexity of Marx's thought, reducing it to deterministic fatalism. Postmodernists like Jean-François Lyotard critique Popper's emphasis on universal reason as blind to power asymmetries and the exclusions inherent in liberal discourse. From a conservative standpoint, Edmund Burke's emphasis on cultural continuity and reverence for tradition contrasts sharply with Popper's rationalist iconoclasm. Pragmatists such as Richard Rorty take issue with Popper's reliance on rational debate, arguing that liberalism is sustained more by solidarity and shared values than by epistemological rigor. Feminist critiques, notably from Nancy Fraser, highlight Popper's failure to account for gendered forms of exclusion and power, raising questions about whose voices are truly heard in an open society. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of the Open Society. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, Karl Popper offers more than a critique of authoritarianism. He provides a vision of democratic life that values reason, freedom, and reform over dogma and revolution. While not without its critics, Popper's framework remains a vital resource for anyone seeking to understand the philosophical roots of political tyranny and the principles that can sustain an open, pluralistic world. His call for vigilance, critical inquiry, and moral humility is as urgent today as it was in the shadow of fascism and war. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on our upcoming videos.